Good morning, everyone. We want to welcome you to today's Wednesday webinar. Our topic today is an accounting overview. And as some of you know who probably worked with the Lightspeed accounting before, it's a big module. So what we're going to provide you today in our 30 minutes is a great overview, and you're going to find out in next month, and we come back and we'll do even more, and Brian will touch on specific topics. So welcome back to everybody who's been to our Zoom webinars before. You're pretty familiar with how they work. If you have questions at any time throughout the webinar, just type them into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer those questions as we can. I'm sure we will not get to everybody's answers and questions today, but don't worry. We're going to follow up the webinar today with an email that will provide you a link to the recording of the webinar, as well as a Q&A document with all the answers to your questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter today, Brian Tierney.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you everybody for joining our presentation today. My name is Brian Tierney, and I am the customer development manager or client development manager with Lightspeed. Been with Lightspeed for 12 years, almost to the day. Worked in various departments with the company. Prior to my time with Lightspeed, I worked in power sports at a dealership here in Salt Lake City, Utah. Did that for 16 years, working behind the parts service and sales counters in the dealership, which essentially means that I've been using Lightspeed for the better part of 30 years. And whenever I say that, it kind of makes me feel a little cringy. It makes me remind myself of my age. But nonetheless, been using Lightspeed for a long time, which is why they've included me in the demonstration today. Really what got me in the industry was my interest in motocross and in motorcycles in general as a child, and that brought me to the dealership and then ultimately to Lightspeed and to with you folks today in today's presentation. So thank you for being here. As Diana mentioned, the topic for today is accounting, and we're going to go through a highlight reel of the accounting functions in Lightspeed. As you all can guess, there's a lot of nuance and detail that goes into accounting, and quite frankly, in 30 minutes, we won't have enough time to cover every single detail. But really the goal is to give you a sense of what the system is capable of and provide you a sense of what lives in the accounting side of the Lightspeed software. What we're going to cover today is some chart of accounts concepts. We'll go a little bit through accounts payable, receivables. We'll go through some daily close concepts that relate to what you want to be aware of as you're closing out the day in Lightspeed. We'll look at some bank reconciliation concepts and speak about what that means. And then we'll review some of the real-time analytical tools that live not only in the accounting department, but also across the system in general. Following all of those things, we will take some questions and answers live on the presentation. And don't worry, if we don't get to your question today, we will follow up with you via email and share the questions with all of the folks on the panel today. Well, let's jump into the first topic, which is the chart of accounts. And really, whenever I think about Lightspeed, I really think about Lightspeed as being an accounting tool. Though I might work in the parts department or the service department or the sales department, essentially when I'm conducting business throughout the day in Lightspeed, I'm really accounting for things like inventory, for deposits, for transactions, and really customer history as it relates to my Lightspeed experience. And so when we think about Lightspeed as a parts tool or a service tool or a sales tool, really we're accounting for all of those different departments, and ultimately it's an accounting tool in general. So when we think about accounting, really when we look at accounting as a tool, the backbone of the accounting system is your chart of accounts. And let's dive right in. We're going to go into Lightspeed now, and we're going to talk about the chart of accounts and what you'll experience as you use it in Lightspeed. So what we're looking at on the screen right now is the Lightspeed standard chart of accounts. Now, the chart of accounts is a departmentalized chart, and what that means is it allows you to monitor the performance and the activity in each of the departments within your business as a separate profit center. But it also provides detail about your business as a consolidated business, as a whole. And we'll look at how that is previewed and viewed in some of the financial reports in just a moment. But speaking about the chart of accounts, what we're looking at is the actual chart. You can see it's organized numerically, smallest number at the top, largest at the bottom, assets at the top, followed by liabilities, revenue accounts, expenses, and so on. And as we look at the screen, descriptions for the individual accounts are present on the screen, along with month-to-date and year-to-date balances. And if I were to double click on any one of the accounts, like say the cash on hand account, for example, if I double click on one of those accounts, I get into the detail portion of that GL account or general ledger account. And I can review the history that makes up those month-to-date and year-to-date balances right within each individual account. I can review the description of what is it that actually made that entry on that account. And furthermore, I can even click on the hyperlink within the History tab to reveal the source document that generated that entry. In this case, the source document that generated the entry on the cash on hand account is a parts invoice. And from this account, I can see the original parts invoice. I can see the name of the cashier that was involved and the detail that created that entry right from the GL screen. From here, I also have access to a series of reports that I can report off of history. I can compare this year versus last year. I can also see if I'm within budget, if I've set up a budget for a specific account right from within the same screen. Now, speaking about real-time accounting, when we talk about Lightspeed as an accounting tool, and we talk about every single transaction that occurs on the parts, service, and sales side of the software impacts the accounting side of the business immediately in real time. The way that works is it funnels through a tool called management activity in Lightspeed. And whenever I look at management activity, I think of that as the gateway to the accounting side. So when I select management activity and then the plural management activities, it takes me into a screen where I can see essentially the register of all of the transactions that have occurred in the business during that time frame that I'm looking at. Anything from a part sale to a repair order cashiered to a unit being brought into inventory, all of the things that impact the general ledger in real time are reviewed and reviewable in management activity. And why do I want to show you this? Well, I want to emphasize the real-time accounting concept in Lightspeed, which I think is a really powerful function within the software. So as I've highlighted a parts invoice in management activity, once again, I've got that source document hyperlink so I could review the original parts invoice once again. And if I have questions, I can go to the person that was involved in that transaction. But the other thing I can see from management activity is the detail. I can see all the individual GL accounts that were impacted when that parts invoice was cashiered. And if I took, for example, the revenue account, 46300-40, and I look at this $17.69 revenue that was received, if I drill into that specific account, if I go back to my chart of accounts and I look at 46300 or 46300-40, I can then go to the history tab, and once again I've got a detailed view of all of the entries that made up that GL account. The source document is present, and that $17.69 that we saw on the parts invoice is present there as well, which we also saw in management activity, re-emphasizing the concept of real-time accounting. So all of those entries are hitting your chart of accounts immediately as you cashier an invoice. So all those things considered, all of the activity that's hitting the chart of accounts in real time, the departmentalization of the chart, which shows the parts department, service department, and sales department as their own profit centers. When I think about my financial reports, like my profit and loss statement or my balance sheet, when I select, let's say, profit and loss statement, for example, and I'm going to look at June of 2022, and I can make those selections from the dashboard of my profit and loss statement reporting tool. I can then decide which format do I want to look at. In this particular example, I'm going to look at this month, this year versus the same month last year. Then I'm going to go ahead and generate the report. And once I generate the report, I've got a real-time snapshot of what's going on in my business immediately up to the second that I run that report, because the chart of accounts is capturing details in real time. In this report, back to that departmentalized chart of accounts concept we talked about, at the top of the profit and loss statement, I'm seeing my consolidated statement. I'm comparing this June versus last June, for example. And as I scroll down the report, not only can I see the consolidated statement, which is my entire business performing in tandem, but I can also see how each individual department is performing, again, in real time. New unit sales, used unit sales, parts and service department. So I can review all of that data immediately up to the moment.
And Brian, I don't want to interrupt your flow, but we just had one question come in. They're just wondering if you can repeat again where the accounts are associated with the transaction from management activities. If you can just show that again.
Oh, of course. Yeah, let's go back to
Thank
management
you.
activity, of course. So just backtracking a hair, we go to management activity and I select management activities in plural. That's going to take me to that register of all the transactions that are occurring in real time in the database. Now, if I click on the blue hyperlink, that's going to show me the original transaction, the repair order, the sales deal, the parts invoice. But if I double click anywhere that's not lit up in blue or click the detail button as I've highlighted the line, that's going to show me the register of all of the GL accounts that were impacted in terms of inventory, revenue, cost of goods, taxes collected, methods of payment. So this is kind of a review of how that parts invoice impacted the chart of accounts in real time. Awesome. Well, I'm going to scoot ahead to accounts payable. And in a past life as an on-site trainer, one of the things that I used to do with Lightspeed, generally the first question I ever got when I walked into an accounting office was, how do I cut a check? They didn't even want to know my name. They just wanted to know, yes, this guy works for Lightspeed, and how do I cut a check? And I imagine that chances are folks on the presentation today are probably wondering the same thing. Accounts payable is where we go to cut a check. And that's where we track all of our bills, all of the things that we need to pay within the business lives in accounts payable. So diving back into Lightspeed, and I'm going to select payables, and I'm going to go into a vendor invoice and just give you a sense of what that looks like. So when I'm creating a new vendor invoice, and just to speak about that real-time accounting concept, a lot of the payable entries that occur throughout the system, things like sublet invoices that are being created on the service side, flooring invoices that are being created on the sales side, parts being received into the parts department. In essence, those invoices get created in an automated fashion throughout the day-to-day activity in the system. But there's going to be times when you're going to need to create an invoice for the purpose of cutting a check to a provider. In this case, this particular example, we've got a vendor called ABC Body and Paint, and they've just done a repair and a repaint of a storage tank in the service department. So in the description, I've included what it is that this invoice details. Now, immediately the credit is going to go to my accounts payable. So again, impacting in real time my 30,000 accounts payable trade creditors account. From here, I need to decide, what is the offset? Where does the debit go? And if I know the description of the account, I can double click, select description, and I can say things like outside services, and then select from a series of items that come up based on my search, drop it into my invoice, and decide that I'm going to put 100% of that debit into outside services. Now, if I didn't know where that account was, or if I want a shortcut or make life maybe a little bit easier for myself, I can use a distribution that allows me to search by a description, a pre-built description, like say, for example, sublet internal repair work. I'd select that, click OK, and it's going to find that GL account for me, and it's going to populate my predetermined percentage of debit that goes to that GL account. Once I've made that selection, from this screen, I have an opportunity to click Pay Now, and I can select the checking account that I'm going to pay out of, select Check as my transaction type, decide what that check number is that's sitting in my printer, and then click OK, and out of my printer comes a beautifully printed, crisp, clean check. Or perhaps I've paid with a credit card. Maybe I paid this vendor already with my Chase credit card, in which case I select that. It's an electronic funds transfer. I'm not going to print anything. I click OK, and that item is marked as paid. One of the cool things we now have here in the US is the ability to do an electronic pay. So not only can I cut a check, not only can I create an invoice and mark it as paid by credit card, but I also have the ability to use ePay, where I can send an electronic payment from an outside provider like Corpay directly to my vendors with an integration into Lightspeed. Just going back to some of the things we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, today's demonstration is a little bit of a highlight reel. We have a presentation prepared for 30 days from now that's going to go a little bit more into detail into ePay and some of the nuance throughout payables and receivables. So just a reminder if you have questions that pertain to those. A couple other details when it comes to payables is we also have the ability to generate recurring invoices. Now, recurring invoices allows us to automate invoices that we find that we're creating on a monthly basis. Maybe things that don't directly relate to a transaction like a repair order, a parts invoice, or sales deal. But these are things like laundry for the technicians' uniforms, or our electric bill, or our internet bill. Things that we want the system to automate an invoice for us to pay on a monthly basis or a routine basis. If I took, for example, the uniform company here just for an example, we're paying the uniform company a monthly fee to do the laundry and to do the maintenance on our technicians' uniforms to the tune of about $264. And what I'm asking Lightspeed to do is once a month, generate this invoice and throw it onto my payable side of the software so that I don't really have to think about it. It automates that experience and provides me a little bit of an easier task on my day-to-day routine in payables. Now, when I go to payables and I select pay invoices, this is the screen that's going to show me all of the invoices that are due based on the things we had just talked about. Those manually created invoices that I've saved, all of those recurring invoices that I've set up to automate, anything that the service department, parts department, or sales department has sent over to the payable side, those are all going to land on my pay invoices screen. So when I come to pay invoices, I get to see all of the individual vendors that I owe money to. And if I want to select, let's say, our guinea pig, ABC Body and Paint that we saw just a moment ago, I'll go ahead and select that vendor. But maybe I'm also going to select my Arctic Cat major units and my Arctic Cat parts and my BMW parts. And you'll notice as I select each of those vendors, the invoices attached to them start to fill the bottom of the screen. And if I'm looking at my statement, my billing statement, or if I know these things are due, I can check the boxes for the items that are due. And then I can go ahead and pay all of those that I've selected. Once again, select my checking account, pay out of a check. And if I've selected multiple vendors, my printer is now going to kick out, in this case, 3 different checks for the 3 different vendors. I have my electronic payments that if I'm directly connected with CorePay, I can send those payments out automatically from the system in a virtual experience, and it provides me the ability to make all of my payments to my billing companies. At the end of the day, or generally at some point in time, generally what we recommend is at least on a monthly basis is run some of your aging reports, in which case we'd go into reporting and I would select AP aging, and it takes me to my AP aging dashboard, where from this screen I can select either a summary or a detailed version of the report, depending on how much information I want to see. I can select specific types of GL accounts, or specific types of vendors rather. Once I've made those selections, I can click report, and I get the data, and I get to review all of the different vendors, how old their balance is and what their balance is. From here, I can print this report, save it to file, or email it to somebody else in the business if I need to, but I can also schedule that report. So if I don't want to have to be reminded to run this report and do it in a manual fashion, I can hit the schedule button and I can schedule that report to run on a routine basis for me, which again, saves me some time, saves me some headache, and makes my experience with payables a little more friendly. Moving into receivables. So receivables is a tool that we utilize for a variety of means and variety of reasons in Lightspeed, or things like if we've got charge accounts for retail customers, if we've got lien holders that we're charging sales deals to those lien holders for a future collection of payment for our sales deals, if we're tracking warranty receivables, all of those things are tracked in the receivables module within Lightspeed. We'll just take a look at some examples of how that system is used in Lightspeed. So if I move into receivables, I'm going to select my AR customers, and it's going to take me to a list of all of the customers that live in the system, whether they're lien holders, whether they're warranty companies, or whether they're retail customers in my database. And when I double click on any one of those items, I can then review the history that makes up those receivable balances. I can look based on department, parts. I can look at special order details. I can look at service related functionality. I can look at sales deal related functionality. And if you've got the rental module in your system, you can also see rental related functionality. All of the customers that live in the receivables tool have one of two different types of accounts, an open item or balance forward. And we'll go into more detail in next month's presentation about that, but just be aware that there's 2 different types of charge accounts. And essentially, as we go through our day-to-day routine, whether it's a parts invoice that needs to be charged to an AR account, a repair order that needs to be charged, or a sales deal that needs to be charged, these AR accounts or accounts receivable accounts generate a balance. They could be a credit balance, could be a debit balance, but nonetheless, it's a balance. Now, if I'm a customer and I've charged a bunch of parts to my AR account, now it's time for me to come in and make a payment on that account. That actually happens through the parts department, believe it or not. It goes through cashiering, and we do that through a miscellaneous receipt. And this is an example of that. And essentially what we're looking at here is we're showing the cashier, myself, who's bringing in $69.02.39 towards an accounts receivable payment for my industry favorite lending institution, and it's going against a sales deal in this particular case. So let's imagine the lien holder's not moving money directly to my checking account. They're actually sending a check to me that I'm now going to collect into Lightspeed as part of a method of payment. And then ultimately, as we get into close of day, you're going to find that this check is going to show up on our close of day statements as we go to close out the day. When I cashier this invoice, it's going to bring that check into the cash drawer for the day. It's also going to show up as monies received for the day, but it's also going to go to reduce the balance on that particular accounts receivable account. Now, another way to handle money coming into receivables is through a customer memo. And when I select customer memo, it takes me to a screen that looks like this. And essentially, when I collect a customer memo, I need to enter a customer information, whether it's a lien holder or a retail customer, or perhaps it's even a warranty company. I enter a description so that when I look at my reports in the future, I know what it is that I collected this money for. But in essence, a customer memo is either a debit or a credit that's not accounted for in the day-to-day transaction. It doesn't show up in the cash drawer. It's not part of what shows up in the drawer. It's not cash, it's not credit, it's not a check. But it's money that hit my account from the particular lien holder institution in this case. And what we've done is we've decided that the lending institution, the industry favorite lending institution, has just sent us 690239. And in their statement, they're telling us it goes against Rob Grant's sales deal, 40,000 or 400,000. And so if I want to attach that, so back to the balance forward versus open item concept, this is an open item. I'm going to look up that open item and I'm going to apply the money that I've received from that lending institution to Rob Grant's open item sales deal. I drop that into the customer memo. I then decide how much of that I want to go to my particular bank. In this case, my main checking account is at the bottom of the screen. I'm entering 690239. I'm going to receive that money into my bank in Lightspeed, but I'm also going to apply that money to pay off the sales deal that lives in Industry Favorites receivable account. And as soon as I hit save, I've now collected the money in Lightspeed's bank, and I've also paid off that deal. So pretty slick, kind of two birds with one stone, if you will. Back to reporting tools and analytics in Lightspeed. Under receivables and reports, we've also got an aging statement for receivables, much like we did on payables. And when I select AR aging, I can then come into the dashboard, make my selection from a series of drop downs, detail versus summary, for example, and then report. And this is going to give me a balance for all of the receivable accounts that live in my system. It's also going to give me the age of those balance so I can kind of review and assess where we're at in the receivable side of the business. Aside from that, when I go into receivables, select reports and AR statements, this gives me an opportunity to now send receivable statements out to all of the receivable customers. Generally, these are your retail-facing customers. You're probably not going to send a statement to a bank or a lien holder. Just probably isn't good practice. But nonetheless, in this case, we've got a highlighted line for Frank Smith, who's one of the retail customers in my business. And I'm going to go ahead and send him either by email or by postal, depending on his preference, a copy of his receivable statement. And that receivable statement is going to include my dealer logo, customer information, some verbiage that pertains to my business, along with a list of all of the details that make up the balance on that particular receivable account and the balance, and perhaps what is due from the customer. So I'll go ahead and send that out to the customer, and now we can receive the money through either a customer memo, but generally in this case, probably a miscellaneous receipt. A couple things to think about when it comes to closing out the day. Generally, when it comes to closing out the day, we're wanting to track what's in the cash drawer as it relates to Lightspeed. We want to make sure the money that's in the drawer matches what Lightspeed thinks is there. And then we also want to track things like our bank deposit and make sure that Lightspeed knows what went to the bank physically versus what went electronically to the bank. Let's take a look at how that looks in Lightspeed now. So if we go up to management activity, again, the gateway to the accounting side, this is where the bulk of your daily close functionality lives. And I'm going to select the cashier reconciliation report, which is going to give me an opportunity to set a date range. And you'll notice, and forgive me for a very broad date range, but we're using a test environment, so there's not a lot going on in this database. I'm always going to click find matching data, and I emphasize that for the folks that are using the system now. Make sure you hit find matching data. It's going to populate all the cashiers, and it's essentially going to load the information into the report. Click Generate Report, and it's going to give you a printout of all of the methods of payment that live in your system and the values attached to them, so that you can say Lightspeed agrees with what's in the cash drawer or that it doesn't. if your folks in your business are anything like me, when I was a parts person in a dealership, frequently I made mistakes with methods of payment. I would cashier a parts invoice as check when it should have been cash or vice versa. And so oftentimes, or in some cases, your cashier reconciliation report's off, and you've probably experienced that yourself. When that happens, because chances are it will at times, under management activity, you're going to have a report that you can run called your method of payment summary that you can review, and you can see what each individual cashier did throughout the day, and you can kind of tie the cashier to those specific transactions to do a little bit of detective work to see where did that check go, where did that credit card receipt go, where did that cash go, and then you can ask the individual cashiers where that check is. And if they're anything like me, I might say, oh, boss, I put that check in your drawer in your office. Go check your drawer in your office. I believe it's there. And this is just a way that you can, again, reconcile your reconciliation, if you will. So there's some detective work tools in the system that help you keep in balance. Now, once you've balanced your cash drawer, you've reconciled your cash drawer, under management activity, once again, is bank deposits. And what that's going to allow us to do is, let's go back to that, bank deposits. And this is going to allow us to track what physically went to the bank and what went to the bank automatically. So our checks and cash that we physically have to drive to the bank, what went to the bank automatically, like our credit cards. We've had a lot of businesses lately using Venmo. So those are things that we might see in the bank deposit. And those are things that you want to track. So if you're doing those things on a daily basis, that keeps you in check, keeps you in the right process using Lightspeed for accounting. And all those things considered, as we run our bank reconciliation. So if we wanted to match our bank against what's occurring in Lightspeed. Now, bank reconciliation also could be credit card reconciliation. If I'm looking at my bank statement, if I'm looking at my credit card statements, and I want to make sure that those are in sync with what Lightspeed shows, that's when we start talking about our bank reconciliation. So we want to make sure that the bank and the credit cards match what happens in Lightspeed. And there's a very easy tool in the system to allow us to do that. And that's what we're looking at on the screen here. Now you'll notice each financial account is represented in the bank reconciliation list, and it's anything from a credit card to a bank account. And if I double click on the detail, it's going to take me into the detail that supports that bank reconciliation. And let's go back to something like our checking account reconciliation, which is probably where the bulk of the transactions occur in your business. So what we're going to see is the ending statement balance, and we can enter that based on what's on our statement from the bank or from the credit card company. We've got our credits, we've got our debits, checks, deposits, essentially, and we go through and check the boxes for everything that cleared that financial account, so that we can make Lightspeed jive with our actual financial accounts outside the system. And ultimately, when we go and check off the different functions within our checks and deposits as it relates to the bank statements, we then hit save, and our Lightspeed system is now congruent with our actual external financial accounts. So that keeps everything in sync and allows you to manage your business in real time, departmentalized, so we can see how the system is performing as a whole, and we can view each department as its own profit center, and ultimately manage our financial accounts as it relates to Lightspeed. All those things considered, everything we've talked about thus far, all of those things lend themselves to some very powerful analytical tools that live throughout the system, not only in the accounting side of the business, but also across parts, service, and sales. And I want to show you some examples of some of those things that I think really make sense to me when I'm using the system and when I've spoken to folks that use the system. So not only things like the doc report, which is one of the visuals you see on the tablet that we're seeing here now, but we'll also look at some other reports that live in parts, service, and sales. So I'm going to go ahead and pull some of those up right now. So the doc report, which is what we were previewing on the PowerPoint, is an example of by department, how do we compare this year versus last year in terms of revenue? And are we within budget? Are we where we want to be? We can also run our data view where we can see by department what our revenue values look like, what our profits look like, what our expenses look like, and we can see our overall operating profit in real time. This is a snapshot of what's going on right now in my business, which is really powerful, powerful stuff. A couple of other analytics that I really like that lend themselves to the accounting experience in the parts side of the house. I like my parts invoice analysis tool. which not only does it give me information about who's purchasing what, but it shows me in this particular example who my best customers are. How frequently do they come visit me, and how much do they spend with me, and do we give them a discount? So really important stuff to know about. My hourly report lets me see what's my busiest hour of the day. So if I'm tracking breaks and lunches or staffing, this report is very helpful at putting a finger on the pulse of the ebbs and flows throughout my business. The daily report, which is going to show if I'm looking at a month, let's say like November, for example, did we see a spike in business around the holiday? Did we see a spike in business based on weather events that were going on? And we can see based on each day of the month, the revenue values that were collected and number of transactions. The day report kind of goes back to like the hourly report does. It allows me to see what the busiest days of the week are so I can make staffing decisions and decide how I can manage my business. And one of the more powerful tools in the parts invoice analysis is my zip code report. And I would encourage everybody on parts invoices or any transactions in Lightspeed to include customer information. And it's going to allow you to see where your customers come from and how frequently does that zip code visit you. Helps you make marketing decisions, helps you make social media decisions, and helps you drive more business into your store. Powerful stuff. On the service side of the house, my technician statistics report is a report that's going to allow me to compare the performance of each technician as it relates to the time clock on the wall or the time clock in Lightspeed. And we can compare the billed hours, the retail side of service versus the actual hours, essentially the cost side of service. And we can see how all of those things correlate to the boots on the ground hours. And we get efficiency percentages, productivity and proficiency percentages. So we can really see in real time how each tech and therefore our service department is performing. And one of the final reports I'll show in my description here is a major unit inventory total cost report, just to give you a sense of some of the reporting power in Lightspeed. This is a graphic illustration of inventory as it lives in Lightspeed. And it's a pie chart, and each wedge in the pie represents a different brand or make in my unit inventory, showing the name of the brand, the total value and cost within my inventory value, and all the colors are kind of nice to look at. So it's just a real easy way to see what my inventory value looks like in an eye-catching, pleasing way. So powerful stuff. Covered a lot in today's presentation. I appreciate everybody being here. Once again, I want to remind everybody that we have a follow-up on accounting next month. We'll go a little deeper into payables and receivables. So if we didn't cover the topic you were looking for in this presentation, chances are we will cover it in 30 days.
Yeah, and Brian, I'm going to jump in too. One question that came up a couple times is people love that doc report and they wanted to know how you got to that report. So maybe you can just show that navigation again.
Of course. Yeah, of course. The doc report is found under General Ledger. It's found under Reports and Doc Report. Now, keep in mind, reports are permission-based. So if you're going into that portion of the system and you're not seeing it, check your security profile, make sure you have permission, or check with your manager and make sure you have permission to access that. But that would be the navigation to get to it. I appreciate that question. Awesome.
And that kind of brings us probably right into the Q&A. So we'll give Brian a chance just to take a deep breath. That was a lot of information to cover. I mean, I think it does absolutely demonstrate the tight integration and the full functionality of the Lightspeed accounting modules. I mean, there is so much in there. So understand there's a lot of questions out there and we're not going to get to every single one of those today, but we will follow up again with the Q&A. One other question somebody did have too is just when you were showing notes in the system, how do you add notes? Now, I don't know specifically where they were seeing that in what report, Brian, so that might be a broad question to answer.
That might be. Generally, every single document, whether it's a parts invoice, repair order, or sales deal, will have a notes box within it, and those notes transfer to reporting tools within the program. If it's notes related to payables or receivables, there's functions within those access points that you can generate notes based on, let's say, the document type or the customer name, or just reminders of why we did this payable or receivable, and that will show up on reports in the future. We'll get into more detail about notes and to how to generate those and calculate and review those in the next presentation. So I appreciate that question, but I hope that helps.
That's perfect. That's perfect. I said, I know we are kind of running up against time here too, and I don't want to keep everybody past our 30 minutes, but just be assured that we are going to answer those questions that came in. So we're not going to leave you hanging with those. And as Brian just mentioned, we do have a couple of other webinars coming up very soon in April. We've got just the part 2 kind of the accounting, which is really going to focus on accounts payable and accounts receivable on April 19th. And then right after that, even on Thursday, April 20th, we're going to have a product release webinar. And that's from our product management team, where they really focus on the latest new product functionality that's been added to Lightspeed from the January, really basically through April releases. So if you haven't registered for either of those webinars yet, I encourage you to do so. And from that, I think we just want to move to our last slide, Brian, and again, thank everybody for attending. If you do have additional questions, you can reach out certainly to our sales team to get more demo information. If you have real technical support questions, here's our technical information as well. Certainly want to make sure that we are addressing any questions you have and you're using Lightspeed to its fullest. So thanks so much, Brian, for an excellent presentation, and thank you everybody for attending, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, folks. Thank you, Diana.
Thanks.